Everything about the deficit argument coming from the deficit hawks is wrong. The deficit is large. It's about 10% of GDP. We haven't had a deficit this big since World War II. But again, the reason we have a big deficit is because we've had a severe crisis caused by Wall Street. The reason we have to continue with the deficit is that we need to continue spending. Spending is what creates jobs and will get us out of the recession. Moreover, it's very important to note that the interest rate at which the government is able to borrow is about 2%. I checked this morning, 2.2% for 5-year Treasury bonds. This is historically extremely low. When the last time we had big deficits in peacetime under Reagan, yes, right-wing conservative hero Ronald Reagan, the interest rate at which the government was borrowing was 13%. That's a very, very different world from the one we have now, where we can borrow at very, very low rates. That might not continue forever, but it has continued for 2 years. I mean, the argument from the right is this, it's going to, the markets are going to punish the U.S., the rates are going to go up immediately. Well, they haven't gone up for 2 years. It could happen. We have to be wary of it. It hasn't happened yet. Now, if you get out of the recession, the deficit will on its own shrink from 10% of GDP to 5% of GDP because more people have money, they will spend more money, they will pay income tax, they will pay sales tax, and they will pay property tax, and that will collapse the deficit on its own by half. Now, that gets us to a 5% of GDP deficit. And how do we get lower? Well, under Reagan, on average, the deficit was 4.8% of GDP for the full 8 years. So we are not like totally out of reach when we have a 5% roughly of GDP deficit. But we can get it lower by reducing health care costs. Number one, controlling health care costs. And the Obama plan may or may not get us some of the way, but we clearly need to do more. We can't continue running a health care budget at twice the proportion of GDP as other advanced economies. Number two, cut the military budget. The military budget is almost 5% of GDP. When Clinton left office, it was 3% of GDP. I think we can ask Marion Pemberton here if we can run a safe global economy at a 3% of GDP military budget. My answer is yes. That, even if we got it to 4% of GDP, that would get us down from a 5% deficit to a 4% deficit, just like that. Finally, raise taxes. Raise taxes on the wealthy, and let's start with a tax on Wall Street. It's actually a bill being proposed. It was actually passed yesterday in the European Parliament. A very small tax on let's call it the Wall Street sales tax. They don't pay sales tax. If I go and buy a bicycle for somebody, I pay a sales tax. They don't pay a sales tax. So how about a 0.5 percentage point per transaction for stocks, and you could lower it down for other types of transactions, including everything, including bonds, including derivatives, options, futures, and I've done calculations with my friend Dean Baker, and I think it's fair to say you can easily get to $200 billion in revenue. So those measures alone would get us all the way down from a 5% of GDP to a 2% of GDP deficit. Not a problem. The deficit is not a problem. The problem is job creation, and that's where we need to focus. Thank you.